Welcome back, everyone. Today we are reviewing Jessica Jones Season 2. And so we'll jump right in. Before we start, though, just know that all our TV show reviews are spoiler-filled. That's the only way to talk about full seasons of television. So from here on out, there will be tons of them.
So if you haven't watched the show yet, maybe go do that and then come back.
So this season starts off pretty strong. I think it starts off with Jessica doing her PI work again. She has alias investigations going. Malcolm is helping her. He's kind of become her protege. And that's kind of what's going on before Trish shows up with some of the stuff hinted at in season 1 with IGH. And essentially how she got her powers. And she starts showing up information on that, and the plot gets crazy from there.
Trish is really pushing Jessica to look into her past and what happened to her, because we find out that we have missing time. Did we figure that out in season 1? Yeah, and we start digging more into that in season 2. And Trish really wants Jessica to look into it. Jessica's kind of hesitant, and so Trish is really the driving force of what kicks off this season.
Yeah, we can tell that Jessica's still having a lot of problems. She's still, I think, having killed someone even as evil as Kilgrave is coming back around, and she's actually notorious now, so she's doing jobs for people and they know who she is, they know that she's super powered, and they know that she's killed a guy before.
And with Jessica's newfound reputation, she actually has someone come to her who calls himself the Wizard, and he claims that he has powers, and she really doesn't believe him, because I guess she's gotten a lot of calls at this point with people giving her false information just to try to jump to the top of her list. And so she's really skeptical at first, and then it turns out he's right.
Yeah, he has super speed, but only when he's scared.
Yeah, you can't control it very well.
And I think that scene was hilarious when he's zapping around.
Yeah, but then it turns really depressing, and he ends up getting killed, presumably, it's like a hit.
Yeah, he shows up saying, someone's trying to kill me, and then he gets killed. A bunch of scaffolding collapses on him. And that kind of sets us on the course for this killer, this mysterious killer that the first half of the season we're tracking. And actually it results, Will Simpson returns for like half an episode, and he immediately gets murdered by said person who people are referring to like as a monster.
Yeah, and they gave us a couple flashes of it, and it's someone with a deformed face, presumably from like an accident or an experiment. And I was really disappointed that Simpson got killed off, because if you watched our season 1 review, we were really interested to see where his character arc went. We didn't love his character arc in season 1, but we were interested to see how they developed it in this next season. And then they just cut it short, which kind of sets the tone for how we feel about the season. They went in a lot of directions we were not expecting, which was kind of a bummer. Like, sometimes things can go in directions and it surprises you in a good way, and this did not do that.
Yeah, especially on the subject of Will Simpson, I felt like the marketing for season 2 relied heavily on scenes with him, because you saw presumably a villain with a gas mask, like inhaler thing, respirate, and it led a lot of people to believe there's going to be certain villains in this that never showed up, because it turns out it was Will Simpson, and by episode like 3 or 4, he's gone. He's out of the show forever.
However, his presence did kick off Trish's relapse, essentially, with drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he now has an inhaler that gives him his performance-enhancing drugs that he had with whatever his weird military experiment things were. And she takes that and starts to take it on her own. And Trish's arc in this season is very interesting.
Yeah, we'll get into like our full feelings about her arc soon, but it went places for sure.
Weird places.
Along with the familiar faces, also Hogarth, which we will talk about Hogarth later, but I feel very strongly about Hogarth. We also had a couple new characters come on the scene. One was a competitor for her in the private investigating, and I don't even remember his name because he ended up not...
Price?
Mattered. Oh, you might be right. So this guy rolls on the scene, and he's kind of cocky, but kind of entertaining, and it seems like he'll be a good, middle antagonist for Jessica throughout the season.
I actually thought they were going to throw him in as a temporary love interest for a while, which they didn't.
Yeah, because the first couple episodes kind of started building him up as a nicer guy, and I think when we get into characters, we'll talk about what happened to him a little more and what happened with his arc. But, so there's him, and there's also Oscar, which is Jessica's kind of love interest for the season.
Which was surprising. I did not expect him to be a love interest, and he starts off as, kind of scummy, and then he grows on you. I hated him at first. By the end of the season, I was like, protect Oscar. at all costs.
Yeah, I really liked him, which is surprising because I am a Jessica Luke Cage purist.
Same. It gave very conflicting feelings.
So I'm like, if Luke comes back on the scene, I'm fine with them breaking up. But otherwise, Oscar was a pretty good character, and I think we'll talk about him a little more as we go too.
So, sticking with the theme of things going in directions we were not expecting for this season, the main antagonist was an interesting choice, which ends up being Jessica's mom. And she's like an antagonist, but not for a while. Like, she fluctuates. And it turns out that she's whatever this like deformed creature thing was that Jessica was remembering and having flashbacks of, because it turns out her mom survived the accident and ended up getting the same experiments and in the same location that Jessica was. Hers was just a lot more intensive, it seemed like. She had a lot more injuries. Yeah, and she needed more like experiments done essentially. But she has very similar powers to Jessica.
But like amped up. She's far stronger, far faster. Yeah, it was very interesting because I think it was about midway through like episode 5 or 6 or somewhere around there that you find out that it's actually Jessica's mother who is your main antagonist. And that's actually pretty much where the antagonist of the series dissolves. She's no longer an antagonist. There's really no villain this season.
Like, she is, but she's not. So what happens with this is you have a very weird relationship between Jessica and her mom, and you get a little bit of that mother-daughter bond, but it's very warped because of their history with each other and the fact that her mom goes off the handle and will kill people willy-nilly because of her rage issues.
Which I will say was, I think, the most interesting part of her character is how they portrayed mental illness. So she has these powers, and they say that when she gets really angry, she goes into dissociative states. So she can't control it. She, like, checks out, and it happens, and then she comes back in.
It's like a massive, like, limbic response. It's very interesting.
So it was interesting how they played with the fact that, like, yeah, she's in control, but also not in control of this all the time. Like, she can control her emotions to an extent, but if she gets too mad, she can't stop herself.
So Trish gets really involved with this because Trish wholeheartedly views her as a monster, especially because she killed Simpson. She's killed other people. We find out that she killed one of Jessica's ex-boyfriends, which was the inspiration for Alias Investigations, and also where she got her jacket from, which was a weird throwback.
I'm not sure how I felt about that episode, actually. That all her ideas and jacket and style and everything
came from a man.
Yeah, it was just like taken from a guy who died. Overall, I thought the actress who portrayed Jessica's mom did a really good job, and
she was really formidable and very strong on screen.
And despite my feelings about the writing choices for the rest of this season and not enjoying some of those, I actually found myself enjoying her performance a lot of time. It carried, really, for how weak some of the writing was there at the end. And especially with her and Jessica, it was a very interesting arc they had together about how at first Jessica's like, I have to still stop her. Very Kilgrave, like, I still have to stop her, and like, and then coming back and being like, well, maybe we can figure this out, and ultimately her mom deciding that we can't do it after kidnapping her. I thought it was a very interesting progression of events, at least for their relationship.
It's also interesting that you mentioned the Kilgrave thing, because her mom actually asked her at some point, she's like, oh, do you think I'm like Kilgrave? Because Jessica's kind of applying the same logic pieces that she did to Kilgrave and how she needed to defeat him and get rid of him to her mom, and her mom's like, I'm different, which is true.
Which is true, but there was actually a very similar moment for both of them. In season 1, there's an episode where Kilgrave actually goes and stops a guy from killing his family, and he does a little good, and he kind of gets amped up, and Jessica's like, well, crap, should I point this loaded gun in a different direction? And there's actually a very similar episode where after her mom kidnaps her, like, we can help people, we can do this, and they actually do, and it starts working out. You're like, oh, maybe it will work. And that's actually when Jessica, except maybe I will just go with you.
And that's one of the things I love about the Jessica Jones character is how hard-ass she is, but how much she fucking cares. Like, she cares deeply, and she very much relies on, like, human ties, essentially, which is something you wouldn't necessarily expect from her outward demeanor, but I really like how they portray that in season 1 and season 2. That is something that came out very strongly in this season.
Which is why it was so interesting that there at the end they decided to start cutting those ties for Jessica off, particularly with Malcolm and very much so with Trish. So she essentially disconnects from both those characters in order to get closer with her mom.
On that note, let's talk about Trish's character because it was interesting. So I liked how it was going at first. Like, it was very intriguing and surprising to a certain degree, and then it just went off the rails, and I'm very confused as to where they're going with her character. Well, some pieces, some not.
Trish was one of the most likable characters of season 1, and by the end of season 2, you hate her.
And a lot of that, I think, has to do with her deep dive back into her drug addiction, but some of the writing choices were very strange in a negative way, in my opinion. So she has this whole arc with the drugs, but we also get some backstory as well. Like, we get some history with her and Jessica, which I actually really liked those parts because you saw how they were kind of in opposite positions, because in season 1, we really didn't understand where their relationship or how it had developed into the point where Trish was fighting so hard for Jessica. And then it makes sense because Jessica fought so hard for Trish when she had drug addiction problems when she rose to fame.
Yeah, and so certain parts of this were interesting. I think when it really fell apart is it makes a little bit of sense for a character, but about halfway through the season, she ends up getting an obsession with getting powers herself.
Yeah, which I wasn't expecting. Although I was aware of her comic history.
That Hellcat.
She is Hellcat. Does she have powers from the comic?
Yeah, she does. So
I guess they would go there eventually, but her drive to want them was such a 180 from season 1.
And I honestly thought that this arc had one of the potentials to be one of the strongest of the season and ended up being kind of weak. It felt like they couldn't really commit. So she starts being a jerk to Jessica, to everyone. She starts screwing over Jessica. She starts messing things up, and it really feels like she's stepping into the antagonist role. Like, she's becoming a very clear antagonist for Jessica, moving against her, messing up Jessica's plans. But it didn't feel like the writers were willing to fully commit to that.
Yeah, because of the dissolving of an antagonist halfway through when the mom is revealed, it almost feels, like you said, that Trish steps into that role, but not completely. So it feels half-hearted. That's how a lot of this season feels, in my opinion, which is so odd because season 1 was so freaking good, and it felt so plotted out, and everything was thought out. There was no extra character pieces, and in this season there was a lot of weird fluff.
Yeah, a lot of weird fluff. And honestly, for Trish, for what happens in the ending, which I think we'll get to in a minute, it ends up feeling like a big jump for her character, not willing to fully take the step into the antagonist role, and then with the ending fully putting her there.
An interesting turn that Jessica's mom takes towards the end of this season is she actually ends up turning herself in and being put into this kind of maximum security kind of situation as much as they can do for her incredible strength. And she's doing fairly well. Like, her anger's relatively under control. She can get a handle on it really well, and then things go horrible, as it does with people with immense powers.
And so she ends up breaking out of the prison after the guy gives Trish, does the same thing to Trish that he did to Jessica and her mother.
Because Trish blackmailed him into it and held him at gunpoint, essentially.
Yeah, and so he does those experiments on her, and Jessica shows up, and it ends with him blowing himself up. He feels guilty, I think, and
it destroys the equipment at the same time.
And when Jessica's mom sees this, she goes into one of her states, breaks out of the prison, and goes rogue. Later on, we already mentioned she kidnaps Jessica. They go on the road, have their little hero journey, and are trying to figure out if they can actually do this mother-daughter thing.
And then we come to the climax of the season, which ends in a fairground, like a carnival, which is weird, but it made for a weird atmosphere. It was interesting. So essentially, Trish tracks them down to this, and Jessica's trying to calm her mom down.
Well, and her mom decides that it won't work, because this whole time her mom's been like, no, this can work, we can be a team. And then Jessica finally goes, okay, let's do it. And then her mom sees how Jessica has pulled herself out of everything she had just for her mom, and how it was going to end with Jessica being in a worse position. So she ends up being like, I'm going to turn myself in. Cops, you hear the sirens in the distance. She called them herself for them to come get her, and Jessica's like, what? And they're trying to say their goodbyes.
And then all of a sudden she gets shot in the head.
Her head, poof.
Which was shocking. And it's Trish. And at that moment, I was like, okay, so Jessica's arc is going to be completely not what I was expecting for the rest of her time on the show. Because I thought that her and Trish were going to be something completely different. And after that, I will be shocked if Jessica can overcome that at some point.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see that because, yeah, we immediately both said to each other when we saw that, well, there is no coming back for Jessica and Trisha's relationship. And honestly, if they try and make it so, I'll be kind of pissed off.
Unless it's multiple seasons down the road. But
you even see Jessica's progression because she hops down angrily and she punches Trish and then she's about to hit her again and it looks like Jessica's ready to. You see that little bit of influence from her mom's rage, which was an interesting scene, I will say that. But like we said, it's just a weird direction to go in and something we were completely not expecting, and I don't really like it. Yeah, she ends up letting Trish go so she doesn't get caught for murder, even of a escaped prisoner. She goes, run. And then we skip ahead. Yeah, to like weeks later. And so Jessica's trying to get back into her life, and at this point, Malcolm is gone. Malcolm's taken off because Jess treated Malcolm terribly this entire season, treated him like a doormat, and Malcolm was really standing up for himself a lot, which I really appreciated, but I was really disappointed in Jessica's treatment of him, but I think a lot of that had to do with her dealing with the fallout of killing Kilgrave and then learning about her mom and all that stuff. She was just completely overwhelmed, and when Jessica's overwhelmed, she shits on everybody. I'm really hoping that she can win him back at some point. He ends up going to work for their competitor, Price, or whatever his name was. He ends up, because there's some private eye cases going on that he ends up solving and getting a job with him. And so he's like, well, I'm going to go do this somewhere. And that's kind of how it ends for Malcolm's character. I hope they can mend those bridges, because I think Malcolm provides such a stabilizing force to Jessica that without it, she's kind of lost. We briefly mentioned earlier that there is a lot more fluff in this season, so let's talk about a huge chunk of that, which is Hogarth. Yes, Hogarth. I really loved Hogarth in Daredevil and Jessica Jones. Like, she is a very interesting, like, neutral/evil character. Like, she's not evil, but she is. It's weird. And she, again, went in a weird direction this season. Yeah, she's definitely, like, chaotic neutral. Yeah. Like, she can flip whichever way. She's there for herself, whether that is good or bad. They set this up very interestingly, and I won't say that her arc wasn't compelling, it's just the fact that the show gives me no reason to care about it because it's not connected. It had nothing to do with the rest of the season. At 0 points did she connect in a larger way for the larger plot of the season with Jessica. So we just leave Jessica's story, the core story, the one we care about, for this story about how Hogarth is dying and she's trying to, like, get better. And it's just like... We find out that Hogarth has ALS and she only has who knows how long to live because the symptoms and deterioration of that disease varies greatly. And she kind of goes into this tailspin and just completely freaks out and, you know, does drugs, sleeps with a lot of people, does her whole, like, self-destructive thing. And then, like, there's this whole weird subplot where someone is supposed to be, like, able to heal her, and then it turns out to be a scam, and the girl who was scamming her, like, slept with her, and Hogarth's revenge is to get to convince the girl that the guy was lying and to go kill. It was so fluffy and dumb. And so, for the entire season, you leave your core story and go see this, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe at some point this is going to tie back in. Maybe this will lead to some sort of thing that rolls back together. Because in, like, season 1, Hogarth's issues with her wife ended up playing out in a big, interesting way on screen with Kilgrave when Kilgrave jumps in on that. And especially with, like, Kilgrave's embryo from season 1. Like, Hogarth had a lot of interesting things with her own stuff going on. But in this one, by the end, I was like, what the hell? So I think what they're doing with this, looking forward, is they are majorly setting her up to be a big player, hopefully in season 3 or maybe in the next Defenders, because she now solely owns, like, her firm, right? Because she pushed out her other 2 people. Yeah. And so I'm wondering if that's going to become a bigger play. But for this season, as of itself, it was pointless. I just don't know who in the writing room said, you know what, everyone loved us season 1. Hogarth. No. We need to devote 25% of every episode to Hogarth and Hogarth's arc. I'm angry about it. It was the single weakest part of the season. For an already not strong season, having a weaker, more boring, less interesting storyline with less interesting characters take up 20% of the season, it seemed like. It blew my mind by the end when nothing happened. I had a big problem with it. Another character that I think disappointingly didn't go anywhere was that competitor, that competing private eye that Malcolm ended up going to work for at the end, but they didn't use him how I thought. At the beginning, they introduced him as kind of charming, kind of douchey, but that would be an interesting little, antagonist, or possibly another Hogarth level, like, Grey character who interacts with her, but they're also competitors. And then, second episode, they throw that away and have her throw him through a window. And then, he becomes a plot device, which kind of annoyed me. He shows up later to kill Jessica's mom and shoots at them both into Jessica's apartment, and it was just like, this came out of nowhere. Why is this guy doing this? And it just felt like a waste. They built a lot of things up in the first couple episodes, his character included, to be an interesting in and out character, like a recurring character throughout the season, and it seemed like they threw him away, like they dumped him. It's like they changed their mind after 2 episodes.
Something I was probably unsurprising if you've been around for a little while, very excited for about the season was the return of David Tennant's Kilgrave character. We know he died in season 1, but I assumed he would come back in either flashbacks or PTSD, and he definitely came back with the PTSD. Once Jessica started losing it with her interacting with her mom and figuring out what was going on with that, Kilgrave started showing up in her head and talking to her, and at this point in the season I was incredibly bored. I was tired of the season. We're trying to binge it and I'm just like, can we watch something else? And he came in and I was like, you are saving this season, thank you. And he was only in it for an episode?
Yeah,
episodes?
I believe it was 1 episode. It was episode 11. And
it was fascinating. I loved it. I think it would have been better to have him throughout most of the season. I understand why they put it in where they did, because it was a representation of Jessica's deteriorating psyche, but he was so compelling and made such an interesting play off of her, which we really didn't get a lot with other characters because all she was doing was pushing them away. You didn't get the back and forth you did with other characters in season 1, and Kilgrave provided that.
It seems like they decided to make it a one-off fun little thing, when in reality it could have been a pretty compelling time for Jessica's character. If they had stretched out, maybe not have it be so heavy-handed, but have him come in and out, you could have had him be a recurring character through multiple episodes, drawing out to show how much this has affected her, and how she's essentially had a psychotic break, that she's seeing him and hearing him and reacting to him. And it's not until she reaches a place... Yeah, it just felt very rushed that then she reaches a place of peace in her own mind and he disappears all in 1 episode, which was the most entertaining episode of the season.
But it was way too short and they underutilized that plot device, essentially.
Yeah, for how big and integral to her character Kilgrave and her past with that is, it's like they decide to ignore it to focus on the mom situation, when in reality, this sort of thing should have been in the veins of this storyline the whole time. Kilgrave should have carried through. Just because she killed him, it shouldn't have been over. And they hinted at that at the beginning, and it seemed like they dropped that until later again. I guess one of the big reveals in the last couple minutes of this season was that when Trish is leaving, she drops her phone, which also way lame superpower reveal. She drops her phone and sticks her foot out. You can't see me, I'm sticking my foot out on camera, and catches her phone and is like, oh. And then you move on and you go, oh, I guess Trish is getting
reflexes.
I guess Trish is getting powers.
And she gets all happy about it after Jessica's basically been like, I don't want to see you anymore. It's so weak. But at the same time, I'm interested to see what they do with it. I don't know. I just think that there are way better ways they could have shown her having powers. Why not in the scene where Jessica gets really mad to go hit her after she kills her mom, she freaking catches it or something like that, and then is and have her move into the full antagonist that you want her to be, and you can't touch me anymore, Jessica. We're equals, and roll out, and you're like, wow, Trish is would have been a stronger ending.
But it almost seems like they're trying to, oh no, she's not quite evil though. She can still be a hero, even though she's been a jerk this whole time, and you hate her now. Every time Trish showed up, I was like, Trish, and she has powers now. So I guess we're going to see a lot of that in season 3.
Going forward, I don't really know what my expectations are for Jessica and her character arc, whether it is with the Defenders or on her own. I felt like they were going in a very clear direction after season 1, whether they would throw in some surprises here or there or not, but now I have no idea, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah, it seems... I really have no idea where they're going to go, because it seems like this season had no direction.
Marvel shows have just gone downhill, unfortunately, after Daredevil season 1 and some of season 2, and then Jessica Jones season 1. Every other show has felt a little flat and at least part for us, whereas those other seasons were very strong on their own. And I just don't understand, why could it be so strong at the beginning and then deteriorate? I don't get it.
Especially considering that the beginning of this season felt like, first 2 or 3 episodes, I was very interested.
Yes.
It felt like they set up some big things that were going to become big arcs, and then all those faded away into nothing by the 4th or 5th episode.
Yeah.
But it's kind of weird how it just lost so much steam. And it leaves me going that season 3, we might watch a review, someone else's review, before we watch it. We might not be binging first weekend.
Yeah.
And that's really sad for something that season 1, we go, wow, season 1 is one of our favorite Marvel Netflix shows, period.
Especially because Kristen Ritter is one of my favorite actresses. I think she is fantastic. I absolutely love what she has done with this character. If you haven't watched Don't Trust the Bee in Apartment 23, get on that. It is on Netflix. It's very short, but great. She's just fantastic, and I hope that they give her better material to work with in the next season, because her character, her performance was of no problem in this season. That was not a contributing factor for why we didn't like this. In fact, it held it together a little bit more than possibly a weaker performance would have.
Yeah, I actually thought her performance was better this season than season 1, actually, in terms of her acting. But I think for season 3, we need a good antagonist. Marvel Netflix shows prided themselves at the beginning on a really strong antagonist.
And now they're kind of weird and not really well defined.
Yeah, which
Defenders was that way, Iron Fist was that way.
Yeah, so they need a strong antagonist that's pervasive throughout the whole thing. I would even say you could do less episodes. This season could have stand to have less episodes with all the fluff in it, or at least find interesting things to fill those episodes, create a longer arc for the character. Mm-hmm. And I hope that they figure out her arc. It seems like they wrote this season after season 1 without really regarding it, and no plans for season 3, 4, 5. Whereas a sign of a good television show is they know where the character is going to be at the end of season 6, episode 8. They know where they're going to end the show, so it's easy to figure out your arc, and it didn't feel like she had an endgame arc coming anytime in the next 20 seasons. So overall, we really tried to enjoy this season, but for all those reasons we just talked about, I think it fell a little flat for us, and kind of joins the bad group of Marvel Netflix shows.
As always, let us know what you guys thought of this season. This was a spoiler review, so I hope you watched it before watching our review. But let us know what you thought. Did you love this season? Do you have similar thoughts to us? Let us know. We would love to chat about it with you. And if you like this video and like our TV show reviews, please give us a thumbs up down below. We're trying to do more of them this year and want your feedback. And if you are sticking around, have been around for a while, haven't subscribed, or if this is your first time watching us and enjoy our content, please subscribe. We would love for you to join the BS Review family. We're really active on Twitter if you want to go follow us over there, and we just want to talk movies with you guys, and we welcome differing opinions. We are not the type of people who are mad if you have a different opinion. So subscribe if you want to see more of that, and we do have a lot of different videos, and if you want to check out some of those, you can look right over there, and we will see you guys in our next video.